Hello and welcome coders to the Sky Coding. So now in this session we will discuss about stored procedures in Snowflake, which is a very important concept of the Snowflake. Okay, and talking about the previous session. So in the previous session we have recently covered the about functions, where we have seen about the scalar functions and the tabular functions, and we have done the practicals, and we have also created lots of functions there in the functions video, where we have seen about scalar and tabular functions. Okay, so the link of the previous session will be given in the description box. You can watch that session from there. Okay, so without wasting any time, let's get started the session of the very important concept, that is stored procedures. Okay, so basically stored procedure is same as like functions. We have covered all of the functions and seen that how can we create the scalar function, tabular function, which is basically returning the tabular results to us. Okay, so as like functions, okay guys, so let me tell you one most important thing. I have written some of the notes here. Okay, so first of all we will see the concept of the stored procedures, and after that we will do the practical of the stored procedures, and we will see 4-5 scenarios where we will just create the stored procedures based on that scenarios only. Okay, then you will better understand this thing. We will also create the stored procedure by using the procedural language as SQL, JavaScript as well. Okay, so we will do that practical later on. First of all, let's understand the concepts of the stored procedures. Okay, and I have written these notes, so if you want these notes then you can just comment, and these notes will be available on the Telegram channel or in the my GitHub account as well. Okay, so you can download these things from there. Okay, so first of all, let's understand about the stored procedures. Okay, so as like functions, stored procedure is created once and can be executed many times. Okay, as let's talk about the functions. As in the functions, what we are doing, we are just creating a function once and we are just executing that function again and again. Means we can just reuse our older code. Okay, we don't have to write that code and again for doing the same task. Okay, we will just execute that function and that function will do the work. Okay, in the similar way, stored procedure is also created once and can be executed many times. Okay, so it means that we don't have to create our stored procedure again and again. Okay, we can just simply create a stored procedure once and we can just call that stored procedure again and again whenever I need that stored procedure. Okay, so that's stored procedure is just like similar as the functions only. So as it is written here, a stored procedure is created with the create procedure command and is executed by using the call command. Okay, so suppose that if you want to create the stored procedure, okay, then you have to just fire this syntax: create procedure, procedure name, language, return, and all those things, just same as the functions. Okay, but in the functions we are just executing the functions, but here while executing the stored procedure you have to call the stored procedure by using the call command. Okay, so these are some of the introduction about the stored procedures we have seen. Okay, so now let's see that how can we write the stored procedures and what are the languages available to us in which we can create the stored procedure. Okay, so you can write a stored procedure in one of the following languages. Okay, so we have basically 5 languages. By using those 5 languages we can write the stored procedures. Okay, so first of all, the language which we can use is Java. We can use the JavaScript, we can use the Python, we can use the Scala, and we can use the writing stored procedures in Snowflake scripting. The meaning of this 5th sentence is means we can use the SQL language as a procedural language for writing our stored procedure. Okay, so these are the languages which we can use for writing the stored procedure. We can use Java, JavaScript, Python, Scala, and we can use the SQL. Okay, and using Snowpark. Suppose that you are just using Java or Python or Scala as your procedural language for creating your stored procedure, then you have to use the Snowpark. Okay, so what is an Snowpark? Okay, let me quickly give you some intro of the Snowpark, that what is Snowpark. Okay, so basically Snowpark is a new feature which is recently announced by the Snowflake, and basically it allows the users to write the code in their preferred language, such as you can use the Scala, Java, Python to build and manage the data pipelines and perform the advanced analytics on the large amount of data sets. Okay, and you can say Snowpark is a feature of Snowflake that provides the simplified programming interface for working with the data which is available to us in the Snowflake. Okay, And with Snowpark, developers and data scientists can write their custom codes as well to transform, manipulate, or to analyze the data within the Snowflake, okay, without moving that data to another platform. Okay, they can just simply transform, manipulate, and analyze the data with Snowflake only. Okay, they don't have to just move the data out of the platform. Okay, so this is basically the Snowpark. Okay, this is basically the advanced thing about the Snowflake. Okay, we will just see Snowpark, Snow Alert later on. Once we will complete all of the Snowflake concepts, then we will see about the Snowpark, Snow Alert, and all those things. Okay, we have another feature, that is Snow Alert also. Okay, you can just go to the web and you can just go through these things, that what is Snow Alert and what is Snowpark. Okay, so Snow Alert is basically related to the security. We will discuss that those things later on once we will complete our Snowflake series. Okay, so these are the languages which we can use for writing our stored procedure. Okay. And from a stored procedure you can return a single value, or if you are using a Snowflake scripting, you can return the tabular data. Okay, so as like functions, there are scalar functions and tabular functions. So from the scalar functions you are just returning a single value, but from the tabular functions you are just getting the tabular results. Okay, you are just getting the tabular form of the data. Okay, so in the similar way, from the stored procedures as well, you can just return a single value, or if you are using the SQL as your procedural language, then you can just return the tabular results as well. Okay, so this is the one, you can say, note of this stored procedure. Okay, and now let's understand about the benefits of the stored procedure. Earlier we are having the functions already. We can just create a function and we can just execute that function, so that we can use our previous code. Okay, so that we can reuse our previous code, as we don't have to write the code again and again. Okay, so we have functions concept already, we have scalar and tabular functions. Then why these stored procedures came into the picture, and what is the benefits of using the stored procedures instead of the functions in Snowflake? Okay, so we will see that thing. Okay, what are the benefits of the stored procedures? Okay, so basically stored procedures allow the procedural logic, that is branching and looping, which state SQL does not support. Okay, so we have basically 3 points written here, 3 benefits, advantages of the stored procedures written here. We will see these 3 points one by one, and we will just elaborate these things, and we will just understand these things briefly. Okay, we have error handling. Okay, we have dynamically, we can create a SQL statement and we can execute this. Okay, so this is basically the benefits of the stored procedure. Okay, so let's understand these things one by one, and let's define these things briefly so that we can understand this thing. Okay, so stored procedures allow the procedural logic, means branching and looping, which state SQL does not support. Okay, so what's the meaning of this statement, procedural logic? Okay, so Snowflake supports the stored procedures that allow the developers to write the procedural logic. Okay, they can include the branching and looping constructs, as you must be familiar about this looping, for loop, while loop, and branching means if else statements, elif statements are there, conditional statements. You can call this branching as the conditional statement, and you can call just looping means loops, which we use in the programming language such as for loop, while loop, do while loop, like that way. Okay, so Snowflake's stored procedures use basically the JavaScript as the procedural language. Okay, which provides the good support for the control structures such as branching. In branching we have if else statements. Okay, and for the looping we have for loops, while loops. So Snowflake stored procedure basically supports the procedural logic, that is branching and looping. Okay, which you cannot write this looping, branching in the SQL. Okay, as SQL does not support this. Okay, so let's take one example for this procedural logic. Okay, so for example, a stored procedure in Snowflake might include branching logic to handle different scenarios. Okay, such as let's take an example for checking whether a product is in stock or not. Okay, and sending a notification if it is out of stock. Okay, so a stored procedure could also include the looping logic to process set of recalls, such as iterating through all of the orders for a particular customer and calculating the total sales which is being done by that customer. Okay, So this is all about the procedural logic. I hope it's now clear about this procedural logic. Okay, so now let's move to the second statement, that is error handling. Okay, so as error handling means try catch blocks, raise error function. We have a raise error function there, and we have result status function. Okay, and we have logging. Okay, so these are basically we will see error handling in the stored procedures in the different session. Okay, where we will cover all of the error handling which will occur while working with the stored procedure. Okay, so we will see this raise error function, result status, logging, these functions later on while doing that session of the error handling in stored procedures. Okay, so basically our stored procedure also supports the error handling. Okay, so Snowflake basically provides the various mechanisms for the error handling in stored procedures. Okay, we have basically try catch blocks. Okay, as if you are familiar with the Java, then in the Java we have try catch blocks. Okay, so basically we write that thing in the try block which I want that this should be executed. Okay, this is means this is must to be executed. Okay, so we write that code in the try block, and in the catch block we write basically that error, that exception which may encounter in that program. Okay, so basically we use that try catch block there. Okay, so try catch block we use for the error handling. Okay, and you can say that developers can use the catch blocks to handle the specific error, whether that may be a log error, any of the exception, or it will you can say log errors of a table, or return the custom error messages to that application on which we are working. Okay, so this is basically about the error handling. Okay, and we have this raise error function. Okay, so raise error function is basically used for the custom errors. Means you can just raise a custom errors within that stored procedures. Okay, we can just throw exceptions or errors with the specific errors and messages by using this raise error function. Okay, and we have also that result status function, logging. Okay, so we will discuss that thing in the error handling while we will do one of the session on the error handling in the stored procedure. There we will see that about this error handling. Okay, and overall you can say Snowflake provides a variety of the mechanism for error handling in the stored procedures. Okay, which can basically help the developers to ensure that their application are now reliable and they are working fine. Okay, so this is all about this second statement, that is error handling. Okay, and now let's move to the third point, that is dynamically creating a SQL statement and executing it. Okay, so let's understand that what is the meaning of the dynamically. Okay, because it is a very important. Okay, so dynamically creating a SQL statement, basically you can say it refers to the process of generating the SQL code at the runtime only, rather than writing code directly into a program or the script. We can just dynamically means it is the process of generating the SQL code at the runtime only. Okay, we don't have to write our SQL code in the program or in the script. Okay, we can just give that at the runtime only. Okay, this is basically about the dynamically. Okay, so overall the meaning of the dynamically is that you can just simply give your means whatever code you want to give, you can just give at the runtime only. Means you don't have to write your code in the program or the script. Okay, you can just give at the runtime. Okay, so these are the three benefits of the stored procedure. We have just briefly understand these things: procedural logic, error handling, dynamically creating a SQL statement, and execute. Okay, so this is the benefits of the stored procedure, or you can call as advantages, pros. Okay, so now let's understand some more concepts of the stored procedures. Okay, so one common use for the stored procedure is to automate a task that requires a multiple statements and is performed frequently. Okay, so this is basically the common use for the stored procedures to automate our task. Okay, that require the multiple SQL statements. Okay, as we have seen the streams and task concept. Okay, as we are just scheduling the task and we are just capturing the changes by the streams, and we are just doing and scheduling the task for doing the work. Okay, means we are just automating our task. Okay, in the similar way, stored procedure is also used to automate the task that requires the multiple SQL statements and is performed frequently. Okay, so here I have written one example. Let's read this thing. Okay, so for example, suppose that you want to clean up the database by deleting the data older data than the specified date. Okay, you can write the multiple delete statements, each of which deletes the data from one specific table. You can put all of those statements in the single store procedure and pass a parameter that specifies the cutoff date. Okay, then you can simply call the store procedure to clean up the database, as now your work is automated, means you don't have to delete the data one by one. You can just simply create a store procedure and you can just call the store procedure and you can pass the parameter as the cutoff date, and then that will be just clean your database, means you don't have to fire the deleting query again and again, as you are just creating the store procedure. Okay, as your database changes, you can update the procedure to clean up the additional tables. If there are multiple users who are using the cleanup command, they can call the one store procedure rather than remember every table name and clean up each table individually. Okay, so this is one example for deleting some data from the table, means if there is no store procedure, then you have to just fire the delete SQL query again and again. Okay, so that will just consume more time and more human power as well. Okay, so what you will do, you will just simply create a one store procedure and you will just give the means work to that store procedure for deleting the records, and then you will just call the store procedure by passing the parameters, and that will be just executed when you will call that store procedure, and that record will be just deleted automatically. Okay, so that's basically the example that how can we use the store procedure to automate our task. Okay, so that's the example of this thing. Okay, so now let's understand the differences between the store procedures and UDF, because it's a very important concept, as you may be confused in this, that whether we have to use the user defined functions or we have to use the store procedure, and what's the difference between these things. Okay, so basically both store procedures and UDF, that is user defined functions, make it easier to write a modular code. Okay, and however there are some of the important differences between UDF and the store procedures. Okay, we will just understand those things one by one. Okay, so returning a value from store procedure is optional. Okay, you can just return a value or you can just leave as it is an optional while working with the store procedure. Okay, so in Snowflake, UDF and store procedure both are used to encapsulate the business logic and perform the operations on the data within the Snowflake database. However, there are some of the differences between these two. Okay, however, UDF and store procedures both are used to perform the business logic and perform the operations on the data and for automation, but there are some of the differences between these two, that is store procedures and the UDF. Okay, so we will just understand those things one by one. Okay, so first of all, we have just highlighted these things. Okay, so we will see, first of all, we will see in the scenario of the purpose, after that we will see in the scenario of the scope, after that we will see the security. Okay, and after that we will also see about the performance as well. Okay, so first of all, let's understand about the purpose. Okay, so UDF are used to create a custom function that can be called within SQL queries to perform the complex calculations or transformations on the database. Okay, basically we create the UDF to create a custom function. Suppose that as we have already lots of functions which are available to us in the Snowflake, but suppose that I want to create some custom functions which work we cannot do by predefined functions which are available by the Snowflake, then we basically create the user defined functions for that custom work. Okay, that can be called within the SQL queries to perform the complex calculations. Okay, so basically we create the UDF for our custom work, for our custom we create custom functions, okay, which are basically used to perform the complex calculations or you can say transformations on the data. Okay, we have covered this thing while working with the UDF. Okay, so it's better to watch that session to better understanding of the user defined functions. Okay, as store procedures are used to group together one or more SQL statements and execute them as a single unit of work. Okay, as basically we use store procedures to group our SQL statements. We can just group multiple SQL statements in our one store procedures and we can just execute them as a single unit of work, as we have seen this example. Okay, for deleting the data from the database, okay, we can just simply create a one store procedure and we can just call the store procedure by just giving the parameters, and that will be just deleted. Okay, so this is just automation. Okay, and in the similar way we can just call the multiple SQL statements in the single stored procedure, and we can just execute that by calling it. Okay, so we will just better understand this thing when we will do the practical. Okay, so meanwhile just look up these concepts. Okay, so the syntax is that you in the performance wise we will see later on. First of all, let's see about the syntax scenario. Okay, so UDF are defined using the create function statement and can take the input parameters. Okay, as we have seen in this thing, basically we create the UDF by using the function create function. Okay, and it will just take the input parameters and it will just return a single value, or if we are using the tabular, so it will just return you the tabular results. Okay, and stored procedures are called by using the create procedure. Okay, we can create the stored procedure by firing the command that is create procedure, and we can just call the stored procedure, okay, by using the call statement. Okay, and can include input and output parameters as well as control structures like loops and conditional statements. Okay, we have seen as this is an advantage of the stored procedure, where we have seen about the procedural logic, error handling, branching, looping, dynamically creating. Okay, so this is about the syntax scenario. Okay, and now let's understand about the scope. Okay, so UDF can be used within the SQL queries, views, and other UDF. Okay, you can use the user defined function, you can create the user defined functions by using the SQL queries, you can create the UDF on the views or the other UDF. Okay, and stored procedures can be called from the SQL queries, but it can also be executed from the external applications. Okay, you can call the stored procedure from the SQL queries. Okay, if you are just using the SQL or any of the languages of Azure procedural language based on that condition, but you can just execute the stored procedure from the some of the external applications as well. You can use the Snowflake JDBC or ODBC drivers. Okay, so we have these drivers which we use for just connecting. Suppose that if you are using the Python, if you want to use the Python, suppose that if you work with the JavaScript, if you will use the JavaScript as your procedural language, then you will understand this thing JDBC, ODBC. Okay, so we will just understand these things later on. Basically these are the drivers which we basically use to connect our databases. Okay, databases with the language or any. Suppose that if you are using the Java, so you use basically the JDBC driver for connecting your Java. Means if you are using the Eclipse IDE, so you use JDBC Hibernate for just connecting with your database. Okay, so we will discuss those things later on. Okay, and let's talk about the performance wise. So UDF are designed for fast and efficient execution on a small amount of data. Okay, suppose that you want to work, you have some small amount of work, so it's better to create the UDF there. Okay, and if you are working with the large amount of data, then it's better to create the stored procedures over that. Okay, so stored procedures can be used for larger, more complex operations that require multiple steps and may involve accessing external systems. Okay, so if you want to access the external systems that require the multiple steps and more complex operations, and if you are working with the larger data, then it's recommended that you use the stored procedures. Okay, and if you are working with a small amount of data, then you can use the user defined functions. Okay, and let's talk in the scenario of the security. Okay, so both UDF and stored procedures can be secured using the Snowflake's built-in security features, including roles, privileges, and grants. Okay, as in the UDF we basically create the secure functions. Okay, so this is about the security. Okay, so let's talk about these things in the summary. Okay, so UDF and stored procedures serve different purposes in Snowflake. With UDF being, you can create a custom functions for data transformation. Okay, and for the stored procedures being, you can just execute complex SQL statements as the single unit of work. Okay, so this is the overall summary. Okay, so the overall summary, the overall thing is that if you want to work with the larger amount of data, if you have more complex operations, if you want to perform the more complex operations which require multiple steps, okay, and you want to access from the external systems as well, from the Tableau as well, like that way, some of the Power BI as well. Okay, these are some of the business tools. Okay, so if you want to work like that way, then you can just simply create the stored procedure in that scenario. Okay, and if you want to work with the some of the smaller amount of data, you want to perform some of the simple functions, you want to create a custom functions, you want to do the data transformation, then you can just simply create the UDF in that situation. Okay, so that's all about this differences between store procedure and the UDF. Okay, so now let's understand this important thing, that choosing to create a store procedure or the UDF. Okay, suppose that you have given one situation, okay, and you want to choose that whether you have to create the user defined function there or you have to use the store procedure there. Okay, so we will see that what thing you can create. You can just create the store procedure or the UDF. Okay, so we will see that. Okay, as I have told you that for the larger scenarios, for the larger amount of data, you have to create the store procedure, and for the smaller one you have to just create the UDF. Okay, so we will see that thing. Okay, so in general, when deciding whether to create a store procedure or UDF, okay, so we have to just create a store procedure in these situations. Okay, if you are migrating an existing store procedure from another application or the system, okay, suppose that you have one another store procedure which you have already created, okay, in some of the another system or in the Snowflake. Okay, so you can just create the store procedure in that scenario. Okay, as this is a common thing, you are just migrating your existing store procedure, then you have to just create your store procedure only, because you are just migrating an existing store procedure. Okay, so that's a common thing. Okay, if you need to perform the database operations, okay, so if you want to just execute some of the typical SQL queries and the DML such as select, update or delete, and you want to work with the larger amount of data, you want to perform the complex SQL statements, okay, then you have to just create the store procedure in that scenario. Okay, and suppose that if you want to perform some of the administrative tasks including DDL such as deleting temporary tables, deleting data older than n days, or adding of the users, okay, so in that scenario you can just create the store procedure. Suppose that you want to delete some of the data, you want to calculate, suppose that if you are working on any of the e-commerce project and you want to calculate that how much means orders some of the particular user is just ordering, and how many orders he have placed in the previous month. Okay, so in that scenario you can just simply create the store procedures. Okay, so basically we create the store procedure in the larger amount of data and the complex business logics and the complex SQL scripts. Okay, and let's see that in the what scenario we can create the user defined function. Okay, so if you are migrating an existing UDF from another application, if you have suppose that you have already any of the user defined function in another application or the system or the Snowflake, then it's common that if you are just migrating from the existing user defined function, then you have to just simply create the user defined function in that scenario. Okay, and if you need a function that can be called as a part of SQL statement and must return a value that will be used in the statement, so in that scenario you can just simply create a UDF. Suppose that you have to do one work, suppose that you want to calculate the profit. Okay, so what you will do, you will just create the simple function, simple custom function for calculating the profit. In that scenario you can just simply create the UDF in that scenario. Okay, and if your output needs to be include a value for every input row or every group. Okay, so if your output needs to be included a value for every input row or every group, then in that scenario you can just create a user defined function. Okay, so this is the thing that whether you have to create a store procedure or you have to create a UDF. Okay, in that, in what situations you have to create a store procedures, and in what situations you have to create a UDF. Okay, so we have discussed this thing. Okay, so the overall thing is, if you want to work with the means if you are working with the larger amount of data and you have some of the complex business logics and you want to perform some of the multiple SQL scripts, multiple SQL steps you have. Okay, and you want to access the data from some of the external applications such as Tableau, Power BI, like that way. Okay, so in that scenario you can just work with store procedure. You can simply create a store procedure. Okay, and if you are creating some of the simple functions, means some of the custom functions, so you are creating the function for the transformation of the data, so in that scenario you can just simply create a store procedure. Okay, so these are the things, these are the some of the concepts of the store procedures, and I have tried my best for a better understanding of the store procedures. I have just written these notes, and I will just provide you these notes so that you can just go through these things once, and if you face any doubt then you can just ask me. And this is all about the store procedures, and we have left with this error handling, so we will just see this thing later on. And now that's all about this today's session of the concept of the store procedures. And now in the upcoming session we will do the store procedures practical in the part 2 video of the store procedures. So the link will be given in the description box for the store procedures practical session. You can watch that session from there. Okay, so that's all for today's session. Bye, take care of yourself guys. Okay.